Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvis, Perek Beis, Halacha Zayin, and God willing, starting today, the new chapter, Perek Gimel, Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Yud Ches, Daf Chai. We left off on Daf Yud Zayin, Amid Beis, at the last line of the Amid, beginning with the Gemara. And let's quickly review our Mishnah Halacha Zayin. So the first part of the Mishnah spoke about gourds, and the Mishnah established that if gourds were left on their vines and they were not harvested before Rosh Hashanah, before the end of the 6th year, in other words, it could have been harvested, and since it was left on the vines, it hardened to the point, as we'll see, that they're no longer fit for human consumption, even though gourds generally are considered a vegetable. And as we learned, the determinant of what year it belongs to is when it is picked. B'sha'as likitasa yisurei. It was physically picked on the 7th year. Let's go with that Rambam, right? That holds that a vegetable that's picked on the 7th year is midrabanan b'chlal asur, because it's called tzvichim. So nevertheless, the Mishnah was telling you that it's not called tzvichim. And why is it not called tzvichim? Because since it hardened to the point where it's not fit for human consumption prior to the 7th year, it's considered as if it was actually picked on the 6th year. So it's a product of the 6th year. So that is the first din of the Mishnah. The Gemara today is going to review a couple of nuances. We're going to learn many more details about the din of diluyin, about gourds. But we're going to realize something very interesting, that when it comes to the obligation of maisres only has to be taken from oichel adam. But chevra shvius, and I know we mentioned this before, the rules of shvius are not limited to food that's only fit for human consumption. Even produce that's only fit for animal consumption is also included in all of the rules of Shemitah. That's going to be the Gemara on the first part of the Mishnah. Then we're going to continue. The Gemara is going to elaborate the second topic of the Mishnah, and that is regarding watering. And as we said in the Mishnah, that Rab Shimon was very lenient, and he allows for someone to be marbitz, for you to sprinkle what we call the stay lovan. Stay lovan is a field that generally survives without irrigation. Don't forget, the more irrigation is necessary, the more we will be allowed to water / or at least sprinkle on Shvi'is for the product there not to get completely ruined. A stay lovan, on which you normally plant items that don't need human irrigation, l'chu'ura, are items that if they're there, they will survive without watering. Nevertheless, Rab Shimon is lenient that sprinkling could be done. And what the Gemara is going to do beautifully is we're going to make a correlation, and then we're going to make a separation between the rules of watering / sprinkling on Shvi'is versus or equal to the same on Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed, even though there's really a machlokes, the premise, we're going to go with the premise that Chol HaMoed is a day in which it's asur to do malach. It begins from there. Elama, because there are 5 reasons, there are 5 heterim that allow a person to work on Chol HaMoed. Perhaps the most famous is Davar HaAved. So there's a certain similarity between Davar HaAved Chol HaMoed versus, well, you can't water, but you could water. If you're not going to water, the item is going to get lost. There's going to be a financial ruin. Then you are allowed to water or at least sprinkle on Shvi'is. So there's going to be a certain comparison. And then the Gemara is going to show you how they are alike, and at the same time, they are not alike. We're going to see that by Chol HaMoed, even a Davar HaAved, guys, we learned this in Moed Katan, is only allowed to be done, any type of malacha, if it's Davar She'enoi Tereach, only if it does not involve excessive exertion, a lot of work, however that's defined. And again, we're going to see similarities and dissimilarities, Chol HaMoed and Shvi'is. That will be the end of Perek Sheni, and we will start, God willing, the 3rd chapter. And
Rabbi, is there a difference between Sdei Lavan and Sdei Abal?
No, same thing. Very good. The word Lavan, there's a machlekes rishonim. Word Lavan means white. The word Sdei Lavan is used on a grain field. Now, if it's because it's not an orchard, an orchard has a lot of shade, It's not an orchard. There's no trees, so it's white. It's an unshaded field. Then stay lovin is also for legumes and vegetables. Other Rishonim say that the word stay lovin is actually used because when you plant wheat, when you plant grain, the stalks at some point become whitened. They go from one color, they get whiter. That's something exclusive to a grain. But yes, it's whether it's legumes or whether it's grains, it does not need constant irrigation. Different than vegetables, for example. Different than trees. Okay. Now, the third chapter, I know I'll repeat this one, we'll start, but just bekitzer. Fertilizing a field on Shvi'is, that's a new topic. The Rambam links it to plowing. It's amazing. And even though plowing was never explicitly prohibited in the Torah, but we spoke about this a lot in the earlier dafim. First of all, it could be the Torah does mention it, Bechadish or Bekatzir, over there in Parshas Kisisa. And even though Bechadish is referring to Tosefes Shvi'is, but it's included in it. If you can't even plow prior, then for sure you cannot plow on it. So we're going to go, and we already mentioned that Rambam holds that even plowing is only midrabanan, that Shitas Rambam. But be that as it may, fertilizing a field on the Shemitah year is prohibited midrabanan. Now, in the times of the Mishnah, what was used for fertilizer, could be it's today also, it came primarily either from animal dung, and it also came from decayed refuse. That means pashut garbage. When garbage is left sitting for a very long time, it decays, and that is used for fertilizer. Now, where do these items originate from? Well, if it's decayed refuse, garbage, it can be coming from someone's home, from someone's yard. Animal dung could be coming from someone's barn. So there were two steps. Step number one is you remove it from the barn. You remove it from the house. You remove it from the chutzner, and you make a pile heap that was called an ashpa. I know that many times we are familiar with the word ashpa, which could be called a garbage heap, but it's specifically used when it comes to fertilizer. And the ashpa is that when it was piled in a field. Now, I know that when you pile dung in a field, it will be fertilizing the land directly underneath it. But that's not the kavanah. When they would make a pile of dung in a field, they would do it to take it away from the house, to take it out of the chutzner. It's a health hazard. You don't want to live with garbage right around you. And then when the time came to fertilize the field, you would spread it out over the entire field. The act of spreading it out, that's called fertilizing. That is what is forbidden on Shvi'is. Hands down, hands up, any way you want to look at it. Now, what about removing it from your house to the field? And that will be the beginning of the third chapter. That since the kavanah of removing it from your chutzner, from your barn, from your house, is not to fertilize, even though psikresh, I mean, you're going to for sure fertilize the earth underneath it, but that's not your intent. Your intent is to get it out of your living quarters. What you cannot do is spread it out on the field, but removing it from your house to make a pile in the field will be allowed as long as there is no maras ayin, as long as certain conditions are met where the observer will know that you're not putting it there to fertilize, you're putting it there to get it out of your house. And that will be more or less a good words of introduction for the first chapter. But now let's go back. So again, the Pedic, Sheni, Halacha Zayin, Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, the Mishnah had two parts. The first part was about the gourds. And as the Mishnah opened up, that if you have gourds, Shekimon Lizera, we just explained, why would you not take it off the vine once it's getting hard? You're ruining the gourd. It becomes so hard that you can't even eat it. Humans cannot eat it. Shekim al because you want to use it only for planting. So the Mishnah says that's if it was not edible before Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. Let me use these words. It's as if it was already harvested on the 6th year. It's not a product of the 7th year. Even if de facto you removed it off the vine on the 7th year. Now the Mishnah uses a double expression. The Mishnah says that if it got hardened before Rosh Hashanah, I'm reading the words in the Mishnah, and v'nifselu me'oichel, or v'nifselu me'oichel adam, right? Either or. This is important. We spoke that out when we learned the Mishnah, because be'emes, unlike maisris, which only have to be taken from food that's designated for oichel adam, the rules of Shvi'is are equal oichel adam, oichel behema. Nevertheless, since the gourd is planted for Adam, and you leaving it on the vine, and it's so hard that it's not even edible for Adam, that is the way you show you don't want it. You don't want it for Eichel. So we said it becomes like seed. You go after the Hashrasha. It's as if it was harvested before Rosh Hashanah. It's not a product of the seventh, it's a product of the sixth. So the Gemara wants to know, asks the Gemara, why did the Mishnah have to say the detail that it got so hardened? Why wouldn't the Mishnah simply say the nifsaluma oichel? Should that not have been enough? And almost it sounds like the Mishnah is giving either or. Why do you have to have both reasons? If it's not any more edible, oichel adam. All right. Now, by the way, de facto, right? Gourds harden first, and then they become unfit for human consumption. Just to know how it works. When something begins to harden. It begins to harden. You can eat it b'di'evid, and then it gets harder and harder, and the end is you can't even eat it. There's no nafkamina, but since getting hard in itself, if it just begins to get hard, it's still not considered a seed. What's the makaba patish? That you can't eat it. So let the Mishnah only write that. Let the Mishnah write that if you left it on the vine and it's no longer edible adam, so now it's not a product of the next year. That should have been enough.
Just trying to understand gathering it at all. Like, what's the point? You gather.
No, you plant it. No, you take it off the vine to replant it.
To replant it in the 8th year.
Yeah, in the 8th year, correct. Yes. And as we mentioned also, that seeds of a product of the 7th year but cannot be saved to be planted. Right. And this is considered its 6th. Otazoi. So, in other words, I frek the Gemara at the end of the Amid. Afilu loy hukshu. Why did the Mishnah have to give that step? Even though, again, guys, the Metzias, the reality is that first it gets hard, and then it's so hard that people can't eat it. But if that's what makes it considered no longer a product of the year that you picked it from, because it's nifsal ma'oichel adam before Rosh Hashanah. So just write that. So the Gemara says that mikiven shuhukshu, that's the point. The Mishnah is not writing two different details. The Mishnah is explaining. Since it got so hardened, nasu kishar zeiroy negina she'enem nechalim, they become like seeds. In other words,
and that was talking the purpose of the use of the blowing.
Very good, yeah, kid. I mean, either you have a negligent farmer. We're not talking about the negligent. The only reason why a farmer would allow for the gourd to become so hard that the nifsal ma'ochel adam, why? Is because he only wants to plant it. He decided that this vine, these gourds, I'm not going to eat. I don't need them to eat. I need seeds for the next season. And like Vlad pointed out, just to make it the next season doesn't mean the next year because it's Shvi, the 8th year, the 1st year. Okay. So no, it's not two details. It's one detail. Okay. And now the question is, you want to know how do you know if how hard it is? How are you boidik its hardness? So Keitzad hu boidik. Rabbi Yosi ben Chanina Omer, that oitzoi, you pierce it, and im nisacha, if the whole mends itself, don't forget it's on the tree. Why would something mend itself? How does something mend itself? Moisture. So then is a raya that it's not completely hardened. But the im lav mutter. In other words, guys, from a yid, he has now it's the 7th year. Now it's in the beginning of the 7th year. I want to pick the gourds and I want to know whether I can save the seeds for the 8th year or whether no, it's too late. Svichim, you're not even allowed to pick. What do? Stick something hard in it. See what happens. And if it doesn't, and if it mends, then I'm sorry, then you have to just leave it on the tree. It's svichim. According to the Rambam. According to the Rash, it's not going to be called svichim because since it emerged from the ground on the 6th year, the isur the rabbanon of smichim won't exist. But it's going to be like fruits of shvis, which is you can't harvest it kedarkoi, you can't do business with it, you can't take it out of Eretz Yisrael, you can't eat it after Zman Habir. There'll be weiter restrictions. Okay, now let's go weiter. More about gourds. Rabbi Yoina from Batzra, says that karmulin, gourd leaves, pturim in hamaiser, like we mentioned in the introduction, don't confuse Shvius and Meiser. Shvius equal Oichel Adam, Oichel Behem. I'm not allowed to sow, even if I'm sowing something that's meant for human consumption, for animal consumption, it's also doiraisa, no difference. Maisres are only for Oichel Adam. So he says that the gourd leaves, which are generally not used for human consumption, they are exempt from Meiser. However, Hadad de Teimar, when do we say that? Only actually also the So Kevin is going to find pictures of how gourds develop. First are leaves, and then they turn into gourds. But if in the leaves there's already gourds, now it came to gourds, at that point, ki yara kain, the leaves become edible. Amazing.
What is carmoling again? What's
Carmolim
carmoling,
are
brother?
certain greens that grow off the gourd vine.
Oh.
And in their earlier phase, they're called karmulim. And the Gemara is associating, Rabbi Yoina is saying that once the gourds are developed, those leaves become edible. Most of the salads that my wife eats, I never knew it's edible. It's amazing. They put all of these mices in there, mustard, honey, and you never know. There you go. And you go to a restaurant here in LA, guys, you pay more for that than for steak. It's amazing. For grass. Now, says the Gemara that Rabbi Yossi Paskin regarding Be'ilain Ale Kul Kassia, regarding those leaves of the Kul Kassia plant, that what? Sha'asu Ligmais Bohen Mayim, that you cannot use them to make them into a cup. They would use leaves to make them into a cup, a receptacle. Why is that? Mipnei Shahatzevoyin Oichlin Oisam. Because since deers eat these leaves called Kul Kassia, and like we just mentioned, Shvi isn't only about Oichel Adam, it's even about Oichel Behema. Deers eat those leaves. When you take a leaf and you fashion it into a cup, you destroy the leaf. You ruin the leaf. You're not allowed to destroy produce of Shvius. Now that we established that Maisris, we all know Maisris, not for Oichel Behema. No, Shvius is everything. Shvius does not make a distinction between Oichel and Behema, Adam and Behema. Okay, Atkan, the first part of the Mishnah, and now we're going on to the second part of the Mishnah. And I know we were medayik correctly so that the leniency of Rab Shimon is only for sprinkling. So again, we're not taking that back. It's only merabtzim, but we're not going to focus on that detail. Generally, Rab Shimon says that even if you have afar lavan is one way of saying stay lavan. Like we mentioned, it's a field that doesn't need human irrigation, which means generally things that are planted there needs less water to survive. And the question is, could you sprinkle it on Shvi'is so whatever is there should not get completely ruined? So Rab Shimon says, yeah, merabsim ba'afar lavan divrei Rab Shimon, and who is chaylik on him? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He says it's prohibited. So now, like we mentioned in the introduction, we're going to bring a Mishnah in Moed Katan, and we're going to make a correlation. We're going to make an association, and then we're going to disassociate. We're going to connect and disconnect Cholamoid, which is talking the same thing. You can't work on Cholamoid. Davar ha'avid. Why can we water on Shvi'is when watering should be asin midrabanan? The answer is because certain products, if you don't water it, you're going to lose it. If you're not going to water a tree on the Shemitah year, it's going to die. So it's generally similar to Cholamoid, and therefore in the beginning, so the Gemara says, it fits perfect. What's the fit perfect? That Asya, the Rab Shimon, that the Shita of Rab Shimon will follow the Shita of the Chachamim, in contrast to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov here, to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov over there in Moed Katan. And as the Gemara quotes, the Tanin on Taman. Now what's amazing is that in the Bavli, I'm sure they would begin by saying that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, because we are quoting from the middle of the Mishnah, and itself, they knew it so good by heart, they didn't even have to tell you that. The next line is not the Chachamim. This is the words of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Now don't forget, he's more strict over here. He does not allow you to be merabetz a afar lavan on Shvi'is. So he says over there is about Cholamoid. That yes, trees, yeah. That if you have water, they used to have all these types of techniques where water was gathered around one tree. They would have these little crevices around the tree. And then they would have canals. And they would go from one tree to the other. And there would be systems how you can help the water go from one tree to the other. So from a tree to a tree, no problem. He says you can do that. We're speaking about Cholamoyed. Because, guys, if you will not water trees, you have to understand how these things work. The tree can die. And even though you're not allowed to work on Cholamoyed, the first of the 5 Etadim is called Davar Ha'aved. If you're gonna, it will have an irretrievable loss. A loss that you can't make up. The tree will die. However, you have to be careful, says Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Ubalvat shaloi yashke, that will be the Girsa Mitahei. As kol hasadukula. You can't say, since I'm anyways getting the water from one tree to the other, let me allow the water through other systems to go into the rest of the field. That you are not allowed to do. Okay? Because the rest of the field can survive without adding water. The areas in between the trees, area in between the trees. Now, this is in contrast to the Chachamim, just to know that the Gemara is not even quoting. The Chachamim over there say that not only can you allow the water to flow from one tree to the other, however you did that, but once you are doing it around the trees, you can do it in the area in between the trees. We're more lenient. So says the Gemara that Rab Shimon Bar Yochai over here is like the Chachamim over there. He's more liberal. It's not only watering trees, you can water the area in between the trees. Sounds like the same. So says the Gemara, first of all, I want you to know, now we're going to focus a little bit on white cotton. Now the following statement was either said by Rabbi Mana, but he didn't say from whom he heard it. That's called Rabbi Mana, Amar Stam. Or the following statement was given over to us by Rabbi Oven, and when he gave it over, he quoted Shmuel that you should know, Bistam Cholkin. Now, what does Stam mean? So we already learned this in this Masechta, that the way we're speaking about a field that had trees in it, the standard way, the ideal way of planting trees in a field is that in every Beis Sa'ah, which is an area of 2,500 square amas, you have 10 trees. Their machloikis is in such a field. Why are we're going to explain this beautifully. The Gemara is going to speak it up.
Is it 10 trees with 4 amos distance between each tree?
No, it's 10 trees that are spread out equidistant one from the other. Let's go with a lot point. It's 2 rows. We worked that out. It's 2 rows, 5 and 5, and every tree is in the center of 250 amas, 250 square amas. So the 10 trees are in 2,500 square amas. So like this. In Bimiruvachim, if the trees are spread out so much that you have less than 10 trees in the Beis Sa'ah, so everyone will agree, even the Chachamim will agree, that watering the area in between the trees will be asir. Now, what are we saying by that, Vlad? Clearly, now we knocked off the whole premise that Shvius and Cholamoid is the same. Here, Rab Shimon doesn't need a single tree. Rab Shimon allows to be merabetz without trees. You want to link it to Moed Cotton. So the Gemara says, 1 second. When we learned the Mishnah over there, we learned it's not so simple. The Chachamim, who allow you to water even the area in between the trees, you know why they allow you? Not because they allow you to water Stama field, because the Chachamim view the area in between the trees to be part of the trees. Even the Chachamim are moida that if you don't have 10 in a Beis Sa'ah, if you have only 9 in a Beis Sa'ah, that means there's more land than needed for a tree. The land that's not needed for the tree, you cannot water on Cholamoyed. Don't forget, Cholamoyed is only a couple of days. It's not a whole year. And in B'Ritzufim, if they are packed together, that you have more than 10 trees in a Beis Sa'ah, amazing. Divrei Hakol Mutal on the other direction. Even Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will allow you to water the entire field, not only directly around it. Why? It's all the same thing. Because it's really only about the trees. And if you have 12 trees, even 11 trees in a Beis Sa'ah, since too little land is for each tree, the trees are schlepping everything from all the land. All of that land is for the tree. I mean, everyone is saying you can water trees on Chol Hamoed. Why do they have a machlokes, whether it's only around the tree or also in between the trees? It's because it's b'diyuk stam. It's 10 in a besa. So there's a machlokes. How do you view halachically the land in between it? Ella kinan kaiman. What's the case in Moed Katan? Benetoyim mata esel besa. Mata esel besa is the standard way you plant an orchard. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov considers that miruvachim. Why is that? Because he says that there's so much when you say a yid it means it should be a little bit left over. In other words, there's a little bit more land needed. Oh, if a little bit more land needed on Chol Hamoed, you can't water that land. How much is the in between the trees? I don't know, but that's the point. Since he considers it, that's called harchava, and the Rabbanan say no, it's like ritzufim. Now, based on the above, when you are associating our Mishnah, the Rashbi is the Chachamim, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov l'shita say it no longer works. Says the Gemara, hold on. Okay, and now you just said, let's go b'shem Shmuel, that b'nuvachin, even the Chachamim hold asur lahashkois. However, what will the Chachamim hold when it's minuvachim? If they will be moided that you can't water, but can you go at least around the trees? Mahu lahamshich, look inside the Mahara, full the 6 lines from the bottom. Mayim me'ilan le'ilan, aliba de rabbanan, that you just said, that when it is miruvachim, the asri lahashkis kol asada. Mahu lahamshich. And the Gemara, the Mara has to, everyone is thinking, like, why would you think otherwise? So says the Mara, the ein rayim mi Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Because Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, right? The Hobbit Tzufin who the Ka'amar. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who asers, don't consider his case to be a right to the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara, it is, yes, Neila Bada, the Rabbanan Eliezer ben Yaakov, that Kamad, the Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov ben Ruvachim, and that what? That when it is Miruvachim, what do the Chachamim hold? Yet asur lahashkois umuta lahamshech. In other words, lekula alma, trees are always allowed. Land that's not necessary for the trees, lekula alma is not allowed. Simple. And the machlokes and Moed Katan is how do we view land when it's mata eser lebeisa? That's simple. That's simple. So now we're turning to Amid Beis. So kan Rabbanan Amrin mutal lahamshech v'asur lahashkois. So now loy kein sovrin meimar. Is it not reasonable to say, as we just mentioned, that b'miruvachin, that whenever you have more land that's needed for a tree, everyone holds that it's asur on Chol Hamoed to water? You are trying to make a linkage between Moed Katan and our Masechta Shvius. Now it's wrong, because for Vahan Afar Lavan means there are no trees. Is loy b'miruvachim? It's not considered miruvachim. There's no trees. Yeah, and nevertheless, Rab Shimon holds that you can be merabetz. So don't tell me Rab Shimon is like the Rabbanan. It doesn't fit. It does not fit, because it's different. Generally, it's the concepts are the same, but poil mamish, the application is not the same. Elo Khan, over here we're speaking about Shvius, and regarding Shvius, Rab Shimon is more lenient. But over there in Moed Katan, regarding Yisurei Chol Hamoed, we don't have such a shita that allows you to water land if it's not connected to a tree. And what's the difference? Ma bein Shvius, ma bein Moed. So the Gemara says, when it comes to Shvius, Al Yidei Shehu Muter B'Melacha, there's no isur against work, guys. Remember that. That's a big statement. There's no isur against work on Shvius. The prohibition is agricultural work, right? Shabbos Lisasu Melacha, Yom Tov, right? Aside of Oichel Nefesh, can't do Melacha, and we are applying that to Chol Hamoed with that tatum, but without that tatum, you can't do any work. That's called Muter B'Melacha. So when it comes to Chol Hamoed, since generally you're allowed to do Melacha, when it comes to a Davar Ha'aved, so people say Davar Ha'aved, like we mentioned in the introduction, even Chol Hamoed's heter of Davar Ha'aved is only when there isn't excessive work. However you define it. Because you're not allowed to work. On Shvius, If it's a davar ha'aved, I don't care if you have excessive work because there's nothing wrong with working to begin with. But since you're allowed to do malacha, hitiru bein davar shu toirach, bein davar shu eina toirach, whether there's excessive exertion or not, it makes no difference. If it's davar ha'aved, you will be allowed to do it. And therefore, moyed, since generally we're beginning from the premise that is the isur of malacha, so that's one nafkamina. So therefore, guys, watering trees, we're not debating. You're allowed to do that. Watering land in between the trees, now that we established, theoretically, everyone agrees you're not allowed to. Why are you not allowed to? Because it's called it's excessive. It's hard work. However they did it then. It was considered something that demanded a lot of work. And even if you have something that's planted in between there, you're not allowed to water it. You don't need to have the additional davar she'ein toirach. I don't care even if it has a toirach. That's why Rab Shimon is even more lenient over here, that you are allowed to be medabitz. That's number one. Number two, how much of it, how much loss? You can't compare the damage that happens when you don't water for a week versus the damage that happens if you don't water for a year. Oh. So says the Gemara, is that if it is the boy nashmiina menada, there's another way of explaining the difference between cholamoid and shviz when it comes to shviz. Alidei shezmana meruba. Whatever you can't do for the whole year. So therefore, they were mated. All right, even if the trees are spread apart, or Rab Shimon allows you to be merabetz on an offer loven. But when it comes to chayil hamoyed, al yidei mani katzur asur. Now again, trees are considered absolutely necessary. Gewaldig, which is amazing. You can argue if that's the case, why can you water at all? I'm not a maven how it works. I know from my backyard that when they built a swimming pool, two trees died because it wasn't watered for a couple of months. That I know. For a week, we're saying that even for the Cholamoid week, you can water the tree. Okay.
What did they do? They still in the scripture, they gave like a little channel from tree.
They had channels. They had that. And I went to the other, and then I think that there were ways that the channel was opened up to the rest of the field, and if they opened up those openings, it's all. But then they would have to schlep more water.
Is the point that it's not like direct in channels?
No, not direct. There's 2 points. Either it's very hard. The more you watering, then you have to carry the water. You have to bring the water to the system. That's called toirach gadol. Water carriers got paid for a reason. And number two, because the amount of loss that will happen if you don't water can't compare cholamoid and shviz. Very good.
Yeah,
Now,
why not just walk around and plant all of them?
because it's called you're not allowed to do that.
That was the first point you said about water carriers.
We're not allowed to. We can.
Forget that for a second. Why not just go around and water them? Why do you have to do it through these?
Well, however, they did it the easiest way. I promise you, they did it the easiest way possible.
I think it's before you want to kind of work down slow.
They did it the easiest way. No, they had systems.
It was a shinoi.
They don't need a shinoi. Shinoi would not even help. Just as a rule, we know that shinoi does downgrade it from deraisa to a derabanan, from a derabanan to mutter, but you have to have a reason to do it. You have to have a heter to do it with shinoi. Okay. Says the Gemara, hold on, v'ois and shivas, if that will be the difference, if we're going to the latter nafkamina, this is such a bomb question. What's the latter nafkamina? That, Shvius is a whole year. So let me ask you a question, David. If that's the case, whatever is asur on Cholamoyed, L'chu'ura should be asur on the last 7 days of the Shemitah year. Because if the nafkamina is because you don't need the davar she'enoi toireach, that I get. You never need to add, there's a tircha yisera. You never had that. You don't have that issue on Shvius because it's mutter b'malacha. But if it's because of time, that the Gemara is not happy with that. Because voice and shivas yamam ha'achreinim, the last 7 days of the Shemitah year is loy mistabra me'ebdinun ki shivas yimei haregel. L'choyda, they should become like the 7 days of Yontif. And v'yu asurin. But that's not true. And
I'm sorry. What's so significant in the last 7 days?
In other words, if I did not yet water my afar lavan, and you're telling me the only reason why Rab Shimon allows for me to water the afar lavan is because if I wouldn't do it the whole year, there'll be a much greater loss. That makes sense in the beginning of the Shvi'is year. But when it comes to the last 7 days of the year,
He's Marviach.
if that is the nafkamina between Moed Katan and Shvi'is, then l'chora there should be more restrictions at the end of the Shvi'is year. Wait just another week and do it next week. And Ashkach v'tanei, we learned befedish in a brayso that contrasts by saying that merapzim ba'afar lavan b'shvi'is means during the whole year. V'loy b'moyin divided Rab Shimon, v'Rab Eliezer also. Gvaldik. So I reject the difference between Shvi'is and Chol HaMoed, Zman HaMeruba versus not Zman HaMeruba. Because if that would be the heter, and I know sometimes you can say loy plug, I know that. We prefer to understand the difference better. Moed, Isur Malacha. Shvi'is, there's no Isur Malacha. There's only agricultural Isur, not Isur Malacha. So therefore, we are going to be more lenient by Shvi'is than by Chol HaMoed. And with that, we say, Hadron Allah stay halavan, even though Ad Emosai, excuse me, that was the name of the Perek Rishon, Perek Sheni, Ad Emosai. But since Ad Emosai, right, we already pointed it out when we began the second chapter, so we call it stay halavan. And now we're going from Ad Emosai to Me Emosai. So we have another Me Emosai. People are saying Me Emosai, Koden as Hashema. So we're starting the third chapter of Shvi'is, and that is, like we mentioned in the introduction, number one, David, fertilizing a field is asur. The Rambam calls it a tulda of plowing. And number two, removing whether the dung or whether the refuse, the garbage, from your home, from your chutzah, or from your barn to the field, that first step, even though it's going to fertilize the area underneath it, that's not called fertilizing. That's called getting rid of garbage from your home. And that's something that's permitted as long as there isn't maras ayin. Because what they normally would do is that they would remove it. They would make this big pile. The longer it would sit, the better it would become, the more fertilizer it would become. But when it comes to the zman of fertilizing, they would spread it out evenly. That, of course, you can't do. One would think you can't even bring it out on the field. So that's going to be the halach of the Mishnah, that step you are allowed to do as long as you circumvent the maras ayin. So let's go. From when are you allowed to remove the fertilizer? Again, either from your barn, it was like an animal dung, or from your field. Can also be animal dung or refuse, garbage, pashut garbage that they would sit until it would ferment. It would become fertilizer. Or from your home, and you can say you can do it. You can do it. You can't do it because there's a maras ayin. But there's a time factor. And what's the time factor? He says very simple. That's a good picture that Kevin had. So let's go to the Zman of the Mishnah, where unfortunately Goyim owned land in Israel, and they worked their lands on Shvi'is. So let me tell you like this, that when the workers, Goyim, we're not speaking about Yidden, we're not speaking about Avaryonim. When Goyim finished with their fertilizing of their fields, at that time, David, if everyone finished fertilizing, if me, the Jew, if I take out my dung to my field, it doesn't even give the appearance that I want to fertilize. If I would be fertilizing it, I would do it when everyone is fertilizing. No, if when everyone already finished fertilizing, then there is no maras ayin. Look inside the Divrei Rabbi Meir. Look inside the Marafulda. So the way people work in the fields is lichnois hazevel l'makim echad basar. The first is two steps. Step number one is they would make a big pile for oisa sham ashpa gedoyla, and then v'achar kach yifazer oisa b'stei lizabla b'sada lizabla. So we're not talking about to be mefazer, spreading it out as usher. And you can argue that just putting it over there. Why isn't that a problem? What would you answer? Because that's not your intent. Your intent is just to make a pile. But isn't that the psikresh I'm talking about? Doesn't it fertilize the area underneath it? And I would want to answer is it's shaloi kedarka. That's the shinoi. The act of fertilizing is not that you put a 10 feet of zevel over a piece of earth. Fertilizing is putting a layer. Making a pile in itself is not the way you fertilize. So even though psikresh it would fertilize, not it's your kavana. Don't forget, it's only us and midrabanan fertilizing. You said before shinoi, because that's a shaloi kedarka shinoi. Shaloi kedarka downgrades it. Since it's shaloi kedarka, I don't care that it's a psikresh. The only thing is maras ayin. So Rabbi Meir says this is the solution. Wait until whoever is fertilizing the fields, because they're goyim, they finish fertilizing. It's after the fertilizing season. And now when you take it out, there won't even be a maras ayin divrei Rabbi Meir. Let's turn to that few times. We have another minute or two. And now we have two other opinions. Only we have a total of three opinions. Rabbi Yehuda says, now there's a machlokes, both now on Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. What are they referring to? And let's go first with the Marafulda. The Marafulda says that Rabbi Yehuda that we didn't learn yet, and Rabbi Yossi that we didn't learn yet, they are referring to the dung itself. I don't want to have a health hazard. I want to get it out of my house. Problem is, people will think that I'm taking it out to fertilize. Once the fertilizer is nicht gut anymore, then there won't be marasayin. So at what point is, avar zmani batal karbana? If you would have been taking it out to fertilize, then you would take it out earlier. So Rabbi Yehuda says, mishi yivash hamasoik, when the sweet dries up. Grace is sweet over here. So look inside the Marafulda. He's saying it refers to the zevel. Mishiyivash hamasik, mishiyivash has zevel. Why is zevel called sweet? Because we're not farmers. That's why we have the kasha. So he says, because hanoisin misikal pedas, all of the sweetness and the pedas comes from the zevel. This is such a chassidish word. Who said? One of the chassidim said, because it says in Chassidus and Kabbalah we learn, that the refuse, the garbage of the higher becomes the keser, malchus of the higher world becomes keser to the lower world. So the zevel of the malachim, they become the geschmaka oilam hazeh. It's zevel. So there was a chassid, he went to Manhattan, and he says, the malachim are good bar zevel right over here, because they saw the material. It's zevel. So he calls it sweet. It's very funny. So once the zevel becomes dried, let me say like this, if you use dried fertilizer, the fertilizer will be ineffective. I have good memories when I learned in Switzerland from smelling the zevel. You see, it's associations in the fields. I know it stinks, but there's a certain, here in LA, many people put zevel on their front lawns before they put the fake plastic everyone has now. And it's a memory, certain time of the year, right? You put the... Now, Rabbi Yossi says, again, according to the Marafulda, both Rabbi and Rabbi Yossi Oimer, that Mishi Yakosher is a leniency. Not when the zevel is fully dried up, but even from when it starts to become nutty, okay, from when it begins to dry, even though when the zevel begins to dry, it's somewhat effective, but it resolves marasayin, because the observer will say to himself, if this balabas is taking it out, not only to clean the house from garbage, but to fertilize, he would have done it earlier. Why would he wait? So that's the three opinions. Or Rav Meir is the most machmer. Rav Meir is saying you have to wait until no one is fertilizing. And Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda say, no. No, I think Rav Meir is the most, because according to Rav Meir, even if your zevel, your personal zevel is already hardened, Rav Meir holds if it's still not the time of fertilizing, if people did not finish fertilizing, an observer would see, he wouldn't look in the details. He wouldn't. Once they stop doing it, once the zman of fertilizing is over, then you can take it out. So what does Rav Meir? Let's say they fertilize in Kislev. I don't know. But my zevel is hard already. According to Rav Meir, you can't take it out. Because the observer won't see the detail of my drek. He won't look at my zevel. He'll see I'm taking out the fertilizer. This is a very Hasidic Mishnah, guys. Let me tell you something. How deep do people look in other people's garbage? Rav Meir say they don't look. They see it. They see garbage. They're very judgmental. Okay, these are the three shitas. I just want to add, I know it's over the time, that other learn in the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi are not talking about the fertilizer. But how can you call fertilizer sweet? They're talking about the ground. That when ground is moist, that is when the fertilizer is effective. When the ground is hardened, and to call Mother Earth sweet is much easier. So Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Yehuda says the ground has to be hard. Rabbi Yossi says when it begins to get hard. So I did, I'll guess, or like that. Guys, we're in the middle of the Mishnah to be continued.